morning sun cast long shadows across the military hospital ward as Sarah Martinez adjusted her Navy SEAL medic uniform for what she thought would be another routine day. She had been back stateside for 3 months now, working at the Naval Medical Center, treating wounded soldiers who came through the doors with stories that reminded her too much of her own recent past in Afghanistan. Sarah moved between the beds with practiced efficiency, checking vitals and changing bandages. Her hands were steady, her voice calm, but inside she carried the weight of memories that made sleep difficult and silence her preferred companion. The other staff respected her skill and dedication, though they often commented on how quiet she seemed compared to other SEALs they'd worked with. At 28, Sarah had already seen more combat than most soldiers would in an entire career. She had served 2 tours in Afghanistan as part of an elite medical unit, saving lives under enemy fire and earning the respect of her teammates. But respect came with a price that few people understood. The things she had witnessed, the decisions she had been forced to make, and the people she couldn't save haunted her daily. The hospital ward was busy that Tuesday morning. Wounded soldiers from various conflicts filled the beds, each carrying their own invisible scars alongside their visible injuries. Sarah understood their pain in ways that went beyond medical training. She had been where they were, felt what they felt, and survived what many others hadn't. As she approached bed 7, Sarah noticed the new patient had arrived during the night shift. The chart showed severe injuries from an IED explosion in Syria, multiple surgeries already completed, and a long recovery ahead. The soldier was awake but staring at the ceiling with the hollow look Sarah recognized too well. It was the look of someone who had seen too much and was trying to process what couldn't be understood. "Good morning," Sarah said softly, her voice carrying the gentle tone she used with patients who seemed lost in their thoughts. "I'm Hospital Corpsman Martinez. How are you feeling today?" The patient turned slowly and Sarah felt her breath catch in her throat. Even with the bandages covering part of his face and the obvious weight loss from his injuries, she recognized him immediately. Staff Sergeant Michael Torres, someone she had served with during her second deployment in Afghanistan, someone who had been part of a mission that changed everything for both of them. Michael's eyes widened as recognition dawned. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The busy sounds of the hospital ward seemed to fade into background noise as memories of that terrible day, 18 months ago, flooded back. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she gripped his chart, fighting to maintain her professional composure. "Martinez?" Michael's voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. I heard you were..." "I'm here," Sarah managed to say, though her voice sounded strange to her own ears. "I'm okay," but they both knew that wasn't entirely true. The mission they had shared in Afghanistan had left marks on both of them that would never fully heal. Sarah had been forced to make a choice that day, a choice that saved lives but cost her something she could never get back. Michael had witnessed it all, had been there when everything went wrong. The silence stretched between them, filled with memories that neither wanted to revisit. Other patients in the ward continued their conversations. Nurses moved between beds and life in the hospital went on normally. But for Sarah and Michael, time seemed suspended in that moment of recognition. Sarah forced herself to focus on her job. She checked his chart again, noting his medications and treatment schedule. Her training kicked in, providing a shield against the emotions threatening to overwhelm her. She had learned to compartmentalize her feelings to function despite the weight she carried. "Your injuries are healing well," she said, falling back into her professional role. "The doctors are optimistic about your recovery." Michael nodded, but his eyes never left her face. She could see the questions there, the same questions that had haunted her for months. Why had she made the choice she made? Did she ever regret it? Had she been able to move on from what happened that day? As Sarah continued her rounds, she found it impossible to concentrate fully on her other patients. Her mind kept drifting back to bed 7, to Michael and to the mission that connected them. She had thought she was ready to face her past, but seeing someone who had been there made everything feel immediate and raw again. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of routine tasks and forced normalcy. She administered medications, changed dressings, and comforted patients, all while trying to process the unexpected reunion. When her shift ended, Sarah found herself reluctant to leave, knowing she would have to face Michael again the next day. That evening, alone in her small apartment off base, Sarah sat in her favorite chair and stared out the window at the setting sun. She had worked hard to build a new life after Afghanistan, to find purpose in helping other wounded warriors heal. But Michael's presence brought back everything she had tried to leave behind. She thought about the choice she had made that day in Afghanistan. The choice that had saved several lives but had cost them their mission objective. She remembered the weight of the decision, the split second where everything depended on her judgment. She remembered Michael's face when he realized what she was going to do. Sarah had never talked to anyone about that day, not fully. The mission reports had been filed, the official story documented, but the personal cost had remained her burden alone. She had carried it through sleepless nights, through the remainder of her deployment, and through her transition back to stateside duty. Now seeing Michael again, she wondered if the time had finally come to break her silence. Maybe they both needed to talk about what happened, to finally process the events that had shaped them both. Or maybe some things were better left buried, some memories too painful to revisit. As darkness settled over the city, Sarah prepared for another sleepless night, knowing that tomorrow would bring her face to face with her past once again. She wondered if Michael was lying awake too, remembering the same day, the same impossible choice, and the same consequences that had followed them both home from war. The next morning arrived too quickly for Sarah's liking. She had spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying scenes from Afghanistan that she had worked so hard to suppress. When her alarm went off at 5:30, she was already awake, having given up on sleep hours earlier. Sarah dressed carefully in her uniform, taking extra time to ensure everything was perfect. She knew she was using the routine as a way to delay the inevitable encounter with Michael, but she needed every moment to prepare herself mentally for what lay ahead. The hospital was quieter in the early morning hours. Sarah used this time to review all her patients' charts, focusing especially on Michael's medical records. The extent of his injuries was severe but not life-threatening. He had suffered multiple fractures, internal injuries, and significant scarring from the IED explosion. The psychological trauma assessment noted symptoms consistent with PTSD, something Sarah understood all too well. As she approached Michael's bed during morning rounds, she noticed he was awake and watching her approach. Other patients were still sleeping, giving them a moment of relative privacy in the otherwise busy ward. "How did you sleep?" Sarah asked, checking his chart and avoiding direct eye contact. "About as well as you did, I imagine," Michael replied, his voice stronger than the day before. "You look tired." Sarah looked up, then meeting his gaze. She saw understanding there, the recognition that they were both struggling with the same memories. It was oddly comforting to know she wasn't alone in carrying this burden. "The nightmares never really stop, do they?" she said quietly, checking his IV and medication levels. Michael shook his head. "I keep thinking about that village, about what happened to Jenkins and Rodriguez, about what you did." The mention of their fallen teammates hit Sarah like a physical blow. Jenkins and Rodriguez had been part of their unit, good soldiers who had died in the mission that haunted her dreams. Their deaths had been the catalyst for the choice she had been forced to make. "I don't want to talk about that here," Sarah said, glancing around at the other patients and medical staff nearby. "When then?" Michael asked. "Because we can't keep pretending it didn't happen. I've been carrying this around for 18 months, and seeing you here, I think we both need to talk." Sarah finished checking his vitals in silence, considering his words. She had spent so long keeping her thoughts and feelings locked away that the idea of opening up seemed both terrifying and appealing. Maybe Michael was right. Maybe they both needed to face what happened together. "I get off shift at 6, she said finally. "There's a quiet coffee shop about 10 minutes from here. If you feel up to it," Michael nodded. "I'll find a way to get there." The rest of Sarah's shift passed slowly. She found herself distracted, making small errors that she normally never made. Her supervisor noticed and pulled her aside during lunch break. "Martinez, is everything okay? You seem off today." Sarah forced a smile. "Just tired. I didn't sleep well last night." Her supervisor studied her with concern. "You've been working a lot of overtime lately. Maybe you should take some time off." "I'm fine," Sarah insisted, though she wasn't sure that was true. That evening, Sarah arrived at the coffee shop early and chose a corner table away from other customers. The place was nearly empty, just a few students studying and an elderly couple sharing a newspaper. She ordered tea and waited, her hands nervous around the warm cup. Michael arrived 20 minutes later, moving carefully with a cane. The effort it took him to walk was obvious, but he had insisted on coming. Sarah stood to help him, but he waved her off, determined to manage on his own. Stubborn as always, Sarah said, attempting a smile. That's what kept me alive, Michael replied, settling into the chair across from her. They sat in silence for a few minutes, both uncertain how to begin a conversation they had been avoiding for over a year. Finally, Michael spoke. I think about that day constantly, not just what happened to our guys, but what you chose to do afterward. Sarah stared into her tea. I did what I thought was right. You saved those civilians, Michael said. 23 people, including 8 children. But it cost us the mission. It cost more than that, Sarah whispered. The mission had been to capture a high-value target, a terrorist leader responsible for multiple attacks on American forces. They had surrounded his compound when the explosion happened. Jenkins and Rodriguez had been killed instantly, and several other team members were wounded. In the chaos that followed, Sarah had been forced to choose between pursuing their original objective and providing medical aid to a group of civilians caught in the crossfire. She had chosen to save lives over completing the mission. The terrorist had escaped, and their commanding officers had been furious. While her actions were officially commended, Sarah knew that her career had been effectively ended. No one wanted a SEAL who chose humanitarian concerns over military objectives. Do you regret it? Michael asked. Sarah looked up at him, seeing genuine curiosity in his eyes rather than judgment. Every day, not saving those people, but everything that came after. The way command treated me, the way some of our unit looked at me afterward. The transfer, the end of my career with the teams. You know, most of us supported what you did, right? Michael said. Maybe not officially, but we understood. You were the only medic there. Those people would have died without you. This was news to Sarah. In the aftermath of the mission, she had felt completely isolated. The official debriefings had been cold and professional. Her teammates had seemed distant. She had assumed they blamed her for the mission's failure. I never knew that, she said softly. We weren't allowed to talk about it. The whole thing was classified, and we were ordered not to discuss it among ourselves. But privately, a lot of us thought you made the right call. Sarah felt a weight lifting from her chest that she hadn't even realized was there. For 18 months, she had carried the belief that her own teammates had judged her harshly for her choice. Learning that wasn't true changed something fundamental about how she viewed that day. Why didn't anyone say anything to me? She asked. Michael looked uncomfortable. Orders were orders. And honestly, you didn't make it easy. You shut everyone out after it happened, started requesting solo missions, avoided the team social events. It was like you decided you didn't belong with us anymore. Sarah realized he was right. She had isolated herself, convinced that she had betrayed her team and her training. She had interpreted their silence as condemnation when it might have been something else entirely. I felt like I had failed everyone, she admitted. You saved lives, Michael said firmly. That's what medics do. That's what you trained for. The mission objective was secondary to preserving life, and you made the right choice. As they continued talking, Sarah began to see that day from a different perspective. The guilt she had carried for so long started to feel less crushing, replaced by a complex mixture of sadness for what was lost and pride in what was saved. The coffee shop began to empty as evening turned to night, but Sarah and Michael continued their conversation, both of them finally beginning to process the events that had shaped their lives for the past 18 months. Over the following weeks, Sarah and Michael's conversations became a regular part of their routine. Each evening after her shift, Sarah would visit Michael in the hospital ward, and when he was well enough, they would meet at the coffee shop to continue processing their shared experiences from Afghanistan. The more they talked, the more Sarah realized how much she had misunderstood about that fateful day and its aftermath. Michael shared stories about their teammates that she had never heard, conversations that had happened after she was transferred to a different unit. He told her about Rodriguez's family, how they had sent a letter thanking her specifically for trying to save their son's life in those final moments. She had never received that letter. Command intercepted a lot of the personal communications after the incident, Michael explained during one of their evening conversations. They were trying to control the narrative, keep everything contained. Sarah felt a familiar anger rising in her chest. They let me believe that everyone blamed me. That might have been intentional, Michael said carefully. There were rumors that some higher-ups weren't happy with the publicity the civilian rescue generated. It made the military look good, but it also raised questions about why we were in that village in the first place. This revelation opened up new wounds for Sarah. She had endured months of self-doubt and isolation, believing she had disappointed her teammates and failed in her duty. Learning that this might have been deliberately orchestrated by command made her question everything she thought she knew about her military service. Michael's recovery progressed steadily, and with each passing day he grew stronger and more mobile. The doctors were pleased with his healing, but Sarah could see the struggle he faced with his own psychological recovery. He had nightmares, moments of anxiety when unexpected sounds triggered memories of the explosion that had injured him. "It's different this time," he told her one evening as they sat in the hospital courtyard watching the sunset. "In Afghanistan, we all dealt with it together. Here, I feel alone with it." Sarah understood exactly what he meant. The isolation of dealing with combat trauma in a civilian environment was something she had struggled with since returning stateside. The disconnect between the intensity of their wartime experiences and the routine normalcy of everyday life created a gap that felt impossible to bridge. "Have you thought about talking to someone? A counselor?" Sarah asked. Michael laughed bitterly. "You mean like you have?" She looked at him sharply. "How did you know?" "I didn't, but your reaction just confirmed it. We're both carrying this stuff around, and neither of us has really dealt with it properly." Sarah realized he was right. She had attended the mandatory counseling sessions required after combat deployments, but she had never been honest about her experiences. She had given the counselors what they wanted to hear, enough to pass the evaluations and return to duty, but she had never actually processed her trauma. "Maybe we should try again," she said. "Together this time." Michael considered this. "You think they'd let us do joint sessions?" "I know someone who might help," Sarah said. "Dr. Reeves in the psychiatric department. She's former Navy herself, served in Iraq. She might understand what we're dealing with." The next day, Sarah approached Dr. Reeves about the possibility of joint counseling sessions for her and Michael. Dr. Reeves was a woman in her 40s, with kind eyes and the straightforward manner that Sarah appreciated in former military personnel. "It's unusual," Dr. Reeves said after listening to Sarah's request, "but not unprecedented. Shared trauma can sometimes be better processed in a group setting, especially when the participants have a history of trust and mutual respect." Sarah felt hopeful for the first time in months. "We've started talking about what happened, but I think we need professional guidance to really work through it." Dr. Reeves agreed to meet with both of them for an initial evaluation. The first session was scheduled for the following week, giving Michael time to be officially cleared for outpatient therapy. In the meantime, Sarah found that her work at the hospital took on new meaning. Her conversations with Michael had helped her understand that her choice that day in Afghanistan hadn't been a failure, but rather an expression of her core values as a medic. She began to see her current patients differently, not as reminders of her own trauma, but as opportunities to continue the work she had trained for. One particular patient, a young Marine named Jackson who had lost his leg in an IED explosion similar to Michael's, reminded Sarah of why she had joined the SEALs in the first place. Jackson was struggling with depression and anger, refusing to participate in his physical therapy and pushing away visitors. Sarah spent extra time with Jackson, sharing some of her own experiences without revealing classified details. She told him about the importance of accepting help, about the strength it took to heal rather than just survive. "I used to think that asking for help was weakness," she told Jackson one afternoon as she changed his bandages, "but I've learned that healing takes more courage than suffering in silence." Jackson looked at her with interest. "You really believe that?" "I'm starting to," Sarah said honestly. "It's not easy, but I think it's necessary." As the date for her first counseling session with Michael approached, Sarah felt nervous but optimistic. She had carried her burden alone for so long that the idea of sharing it felt both terrifying and liberating. The night before their appointment, Sarah couldn't sleep again, but this time it wasn't because of nightmares. Instead, she found herself thinking about the future for the first time in months. She thought about what it might be like to not carry the weight of that day in Afghanistan as a source of shame, but as a testament to her commitment to saving lives. She thought about Michael and his journey toward healing, and how their shared experience had become a source of strength rather than isolation. She thought about her patients at the hospital, and how her own healing might help her become a better caregiver for them. For the first time since that day in Afghanistan, Sarah allowed herself to hope that she might find a way to move forward without abandoning the values that had made her choose to save lives over completing a mission. She began to see that her choice hadn't been a failure of duty, but an expression of the highest ideals of military service. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in 18 months. Peace. Not complete healing, but the beginning of a path toward it. Tomorrow she and Michael would take the first formal step in processing their trauma together. And for the first time, Sarah felt ready to face whatever that process might reveal. The morning sun streaming through her bedroom window felt like a symbol of hope, a reminder that each day brought new opportunities for growth and healing. Sarah got dressed for work with a lighter heart, ready to face both her past and her future with renewed determination. The therapy sessions with Dr. Reeves began slowly, with both Sarah and Michael testing the waters of vulnerability. The first session was mostly introductory, establishing ground rules and helping Dr. Reeves understand their shared history without diving too deeply into the traumatic events. Dr. Reeves's office was comfortable and private, with soft lighting and chairs arranged in a circle rather than the formal setup Sarah had expected. The doctor herself had an easy manner that put both patients at ease, and her military background showed in her understanding of the culture and pressures they had faced. Before we discuss the specific incident you've both mentioned, Dr. Reeves said during their second session, I want to understand how each of you has been coping since returning from deployment. Michael spoke first, describing his struggle with crowds, loud noises, and the constant feeling of being on edge. He talked about how the explosion that had injured him had brought back all the unprocessed trauma from his earlier deployments, creating a compound effect that left him feeling overwhelmed. Sarah found it easier to talk about her coping mechanisms than her actual feelings. She described her work at the hospital, her tendency toward isolation, and her difficulty sleeping. She was surprised to hear herself admitting to problems she had never acknowledged before. You've both mentioned feeling isolated, Dr. Reeves observed. Can you tell me more about that? It's like we live in two different worlds, Sarah said. There's the world where normal people worry about normal things, and then there's the world we came from where life and death decisions happen every day. It's hard to connect those two worlds. Michael nodded. People thank you for your service, but they don't really want to know what that service involved. They want to feel good about supporting the troops without having to deal with the reality of what war actually does to people. Dr. Reeves listened without judgment, taking notes and asking clarifying questions. Sarah found herself opening up more than she had expected, sharing feelings she had kept locked away for months. By their third session, they were ready to discuss the incident in Afghanistan. Dr. Reeves guided them through the events of that day, helping them separate facts from emotions and individual experiences from shared trauma. Sarah, Dr. Reeves said, you've mentioned feeling like you failed your mission. Can you tell me what failure means to you in this context? Sarah thought carefully before answering. I was trained to complete objectives. The mission was to capture or eliminate a high-value target. Instead, I chose to provide medical aid to civilians. The target escaped because I wasn't available to support the team's advance. And what does success look like for a Navy SEAL medic? Dr. Reeves asked. This question caught Sarah off guard. She had been so focused on the mission failure that she hadn't considered her role specifically as a medic. To save lives, she said slowly. To keep my teammates alive and to provide medical aid when needed. How many lives did you save that day? Dr. Reeves asked. 23 civilians, Michael answered when Sarah hesitated, including 8 children. Dr. Reeves looked at Sarah. Does that sound like failure to you? Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes. But the mission was one objective among many, Dr. Reeves interrupted gently. Michael, from your perspective as a teammate, how do you view Sarah's actions that day? Michael leaned forward in his chair. She did exactly what a medic is supposed to do. She prioritized saving lives over everything else. If our roles had been reversed, I hope I would have made the same choice. This was the first time Michael had explicitly stated his support for her decision, and Sarah felt a weight lifting from her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she was carrying. Over the following sessions, they worked through the details of that day and its aftermath. Dr. Reeves helped them understand how the military's compartmentalization of the incident had prevented them from processing their trauma together. leading to months of unnecessary isolation and self-blame. The military is very good at preparing soldiers for combat, Dr. Reeves explained, but less effective at helping them process the moral and emotional complexities of war. The incident you experienced involved what we call a moral injury, a situation where you were forced to make a choice between competing values. Sarah had never heard this term before, but it resonated deeply with her experience. Is that why it's been so hard to move past? Moral injuries can be particularly difficult to heal because they challenge our fundamental beliefs about right and wrong, Dr. Reeves said. In your case, Sarah, you were faced with a choice between two core military values: mission completion and preservation of life. There was no perfect answer. As their sessions continued, Sarah began to see her actions from a different perspective. Instead of viewing her choice as a failure, she started to understand it as a complex decision made under extreme circumstances, with incomplete information and competing priorities. Michael, meanwhile, worked through his own survivor's guilt and the trauma from his more recent injury. He revealed that he had blamed himself for not being able to support Sarah better on that day in Afghanistan, feeling that if he had been more effective as a team member, she might not have been forced to make such a difficult choice. I keep thinking about what would have happened if I had moved faster, if I had been better positioned to help, he told Dr. Reeves. Maybe Sarah wouldn't have had to choose between the mission and those civilians. Dr. Reeves helped both of them understand that their individual actions existed within a larger context of war, command decisions, and circumstances beyond their control. She taught them techniques for managing their symptoms and processing their emotions in healthier ways. One of the most valuable aspects of the joint sessions was seeing how their trauma had affected each other. Sarah learned that Michael had carried his own burden of guilt and responsibility for what happened. Michael learned that Sarah's isolation after the incident had been driven by shame, rather than any desire to distance herself from their friendship. "I thought you blamed me," Sarah told him during one session. "I thought everyone did. I thought you didn't want anything to do with us anymore," Michael replied. "Like you decided we weren't worth the cost of your career." Dr. Reeves helped them see how these misunderstandings had compounded their individual trauma, creating additional layers of pain that could now be addressed and healed. As weeks passed, both Sarah and Michael began to show signs of improvement. Sarah's sleep improved and she found herself more engaged with her work and her patients. Michael's anxiety decreased and he started participating more actively in his physical rehabilitation. The breakthrough moment came during their 8th session together. Dr. Reeves asked them to write letters to themselves on that day in Afghanistan, offering the perspective and understanding they had gained through therapy. Sarah's letter was addressed to herself in those chaotic moments when she was deciding whether to pursue the mission or help the wounded civilians. In it, she wrote about the courage her choice had required and the lives that had been saved because of her decision. Michael's letter was to himself in the aftermath of the incident, when he was struggling to understand Sarah's actions and his own role in the mission's outcome. He wrote about forgiveness, understanding, and the importance of supporting teammates even when circumstances are impossible to control. Reading these letters aloud to each other marked a turning point in their healing process. For the first time since Afghanistan, both Sarah and Michael felt that they were truly moving forward rather than just surviving. 3 months into their therapy sessions, Sarah noticed significant changes in both herself and Michael. The nightmares that had plagued her for over a year became less frequent and less intense. She found herself sleeping through the night more often, waking refreshed rather than exhausted by the battles she fought in her dreams. At work, Sarah's colleagues began commenting on the positive changes they observed. She smiled more often, engaged in casual conversations with her coworkers, and seemed more present during her interactions with patients. Her supervisor, Commander Phillips, pulled her aside one afternoon to acknowledge her improved performance. "Martinez, I don't know what's changed, but whatever you're doing, keep it up," Commander Phillips said. "Your patient care has always been excellent, but lately, you seem more connected. The patients respond well to you." Sarah felt a warmth of satisfaction that she hadn't experienced in her work for months. She was beginning to understand that healing her own trauma was making her a better caregiver for others. Her conversations with Dr. Reeves had helped her see that her experiences, while painful, had given her a deeper understanding of what wounded soldiers were going through. Michael's recovery was equally impressive. His physical therapy was progressing ahead of schedule, and his doctors were optimistic about his eventual return to active duty, though perhaps not in a combat role. More importantly, his psychological healing was allowing him to reconnect with aspects of himself that he had lost after the explosion. During one of their therapy sessions, Dr. Reeves introduced a new exercise. She asked them to identify ways their experience in Afghanistan had made them stronger or more capable, rather than focusing solely on the damage it had caused. This isn't about minimizing your trauma, she explained, but about recognizing that you've developed resilience and insights that can serve you and others moving forward. Sarah struggled with this concept initially. For so long, she had viewed that day in Afghanistan as nothing but loss. Lost mission, lost career prospects, lost sense of purpose. But as she thought more deeply, she began to recognize positive changes in herself. "I think I'm more compassionate now," she said slowly. "Before Afghanistan, I was very focused on following orders and completing objectives. Now I'm more aware of the human cost of our decisions. When I work with patients here, I see them as whole people, not just medical cases to solve." Michael nodded. "I've been thinking about that too. The explosion that injured me, it was horrible, but it also made me realize how much I value life. Not just my own, but everyone's. I don't take anything for granted anymore." Dr. Reeves encouraged them to explore these insights further. How might these changes influence your future choices and goals? This question opened up conversations about their plans beyond their current healing process. Michael was facing decisions about his military career and what role he wanted to play in the Navy moving forward. Sarah was considering whether to remain in her current position or pursue opportunities that would allow her to help other veterans process their own trauma. "I've been thinking about becoming a counselor," Sarah admitted during one session. "Someone like you, Dr. Reeves, who understands military culture and can help soldiers work through their experiences." Dr. Reeves smiled. "That's an interesting development. What draws you to that possibility?" Sarah thought about her answer. "I spent so many months feeling alone with what happened in Afghanistan. If our therapy has taught me anything, it's that healing happens better when you don't have to do it alone. I want to help other soldiers find that connection." Michael was considering a different path. His injuries would likely prevent him from returning to combat roles, but he was interested in training and mentoring younger soldiers. "I want to help prepare people for what they might face," he said. "Not just the physical dangers, but the psychological and moral challenges that come with military service." As their individual goals became clearer, Sarah and Michael also began to discuss their friendship and how it had evolved through their shared healing process. They had entered therapy as former teammates trying to process a traumatic shared experience. They were emerging as close friends who had learned to support each other through the most difficult period of their lives. "I feel like I know you better now than I did during our deployment," Michael told Sarah one evening as they walked through the hospital grounds. "Back then, we were all so focused on maintaining our tough exterior. Now we've seen each other at our most vulnerable," Sarah agreed. "It's strange how trauma can either destroy relationships or make them deeper. I'm grateful we found our way to the deeper connection." Their friendship had also become a model for other patients at the hospital. Dr. Reeves had asked their permission to share some aspects of their story without revealing classified details with other veterans who were struggling with similar issues. Sarah and Michael had agreed, hoping their experience might help others feel less alone. One young Army veteran named Kelly had been particularly inspired by their story. She had been struggling with guilt over a decision she made during her deployment in Iraq, and learning that others had faced similar moral dilemmas had helped her begin her own healing process. "Seeing how you two support each other gives me hope," Kelly told them during a group session that Dr. Reeves had organized. "I've been so ashamed of my choices that I couldn't imagine anyone understanding." Sarah felt a deep sense of purpose in being able to help Kelly and others like her. It reinforced her growing desire to make counseling and veteran support a formal part of her career. As summer turned to fall, both Sarah and Michael reached a milestone in their therapy. Dr. Reeves suggested they were ready to transition from weekly sessions to monthly check-ins, a sign that they had developed the tools they needed to continue their healing independently. "This doesn't mean your healing is complete," Dr. Reeves cautioned. "Recovery from trauma is an ongoing process. but you've both demonstrated that you can face difficult emotions and memories without being overwhelmed by them. Sarah felt a mixture of pride and nervousness about this transition. The sessions with Dr. Reeves and Michael had become a cornerstone of her week, a safe space where she could continue processing her experiences. The idea of relying more on her own resources felt both empowering and challenging. Michael shared her mixed feelings. "These sessions have been the most helpful thing I've done since getting injured," he said. "It's scary to think about managing without them," Dr. Reeves reassured them both. "You're not losing this support system. You're gaining confidence in your ability to support yourselves and each other. The friendship you've built through this process is itself a form of ongoing therapy." The doctor was right. Sarah and Michael had developed a deep understanding of each other's triggers, coping mechanisms, and warning signs. They had learned to check in with each other regularly, offering support when needed and celebrating progress together. Their final regular session was both celebratory and emotional. They reflected on how far they had come since that first awkward encounter in the hospital ward 6 months earlier. Sarah remembered how seeing Michael had initially brought back all her worst memories and feelings of shame. Now his presence was a source of comfort and strength. "I want to thank you both," Dr. Reeves said as they prepared to leave. "Working with you has reminded me why I chose this profession. Your courage in facing your trauma head-on, and your commitment to helping each other heal has been inspiring to witness." As they walked out of Dr. Reeves's office together, Sarah felt a sense of completion that she hadn't expected. Not the completion of healing. She understood that would be a lifelong process. But the completion of a journey from isolation and shame to connection and purpose. That evening, they went to their usual coffee shop to mark the occasion. The same corner table where they had first tentatively begun to discuss their shared trauma now felt like a sacred space where their friendship had been forged through honesty and vulnerability. "So what happens now?" Michael asked, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. Sarah considered the question. "Now we keep moving forward. We take what we've learned and use it to build something better." They talked about their plans and dreams, their fears and hopes for the future. Sarah was moving forward with her application to a counseling program that would allow her to specialize in military trauma. Michael was exploring opportunities in training and veteran support services, but perhaps more importantly, they were both learning to live with their memories rather than being haunted by them. The choice Sarah had made that day in Afghanistan would always be a significant moment in her life, but it no longer defined her as a failure. Instead, it had become part of a larger story of service, sacrifice, and ultimately healing. As they prepared to leave the coffee shop, Michael raised his cup in a toast. "To second chances," he said. Sarah raised her cup to meet his. "To healing together," she replied. Outside, the autumn evening was crisp and clear. Sarah looked up at the stars visible despite the city lights and felt something she hadn't experienced in nearly 2 years. Genuine peace. The road ahead would have its challenges, but for the first time since Afghanistan, she felt ready to face them with hope rather than fear. 6 months after completing their intensive therapy sessions, Sarah found herself standing in front of a classroom full of first-year counseling students. She had enrolled in a graduate program specializing in military and veteran mental health, and today she was giving her first presentation on trauma-informed care. "Trauma is not just about what happened to someone," Sarah told her classmates, drawing on both her academic studies and personal experience. "It's about how that experience continues to live in their body and mind, affecting their relationships, their work, and their sense of self." Her professor, Dr. Kim Watanabe, had asked students to share case studies that illustrated key concepts in trauma therapy. Sarah had chosen to discuss the general principles she had learned from her own healing process, carefully avoiding specific details that might compromise military security or patient confidentiality. After class, Dr. Watanabe approached her. "That was an excellent presentation, Sarah. Your insights into the military culture and how it can both help and hinder the healing process were particularly valuable. Have you considered focusing your thesis research on that topic?" Sarah had been thinking about exactly that possibility. Her unique perspective as both a former combat veteran and a current counseling student positioned her to contribute meaningful research to the field. "I'm very interested in exploring how peer support models might be more effective than traditional individual therapy for certain types of military trauma." Dr. Watanabe nodded enthusiastically. That could make a real contribution to the field. Military mental health is an area where we need more research from people who understand the culture from the inside. Meanwhile, Michael had found his own path forward. After being medically retired from active duty, he had taken a position with a veteran support organization that provided transition services for soldiers leaving the military. His role involved mentoring recently discharged veterans and helping them navigate the challenges of returning to civilian life. His office was in the same building as the Veteran Services Center, and his days were filled with conversations that reminded him of his own struggles and triumphs over the past year. The skills he had learned in therapy, listening without judgment, validating difficult emotions, and helping others find their own path to healing, proved invaluable in his new career. One particular client, a former Marine named David who had served in Syria, reminded Michael of his own journey. David was struggling with anger and isolation, pushing away family members and refusing to engage with traditional mental health services. "I don't need some civilian therapist telling me how to feel about what I've seen," David said during one of their meetings. "They don't understand what it's like over there." Michael recognized the resistance because he had felt the same way initially. "You're right," he said. "A lot of therapists don't understand military culture, but some do, and sometimes the understanding comes not just from the therapist, but from connecting with other veterans who've walked a similar path." He told David about his own experience with joint therapy sessions, how sharing his trauma with someone who had been there had made all the difference in his healing. "It doesn't mean you have to spill your guts to everyone," Michael explained. "But isolation makes everything harder." David was skeptical, but he agreed to attend a support group that Michael facilitated for veterans dealing with combat trauma. The group met weekly and included veterans from different conflicts and branches of service, but all united by their shared understanding of what military service could demand from a person. Sarah and Michael stayed in close contact throughout this period of professional growth. They met regularly for coffee, sharing updates on their work and continuing to support each other through the ongoing challenges of building new careers while managing their own healing process. During one of these meetings, Sarah shared an idea that had been developing in her mind. "I've been thinking about the lack of resources for military medics specifically," she said. "We face unique moral challenges that other soldiers don't necessarily encounter. The decision-making we do under fire, the people we can't save despite our best efforts. It's a specific type of trauma that deserves specialized attention." Michael was immediately interested. "That's exactly what you went through in Afghanistan. The impossible choice between competing priorities." "Exactly. And I think there are a lot of military medics carrying similar burdens in silence. What if we developed a specific program for healthcare providers who've served in combat roles?" This conversation sparked what would become Sarah's thesis project and eventually a joint venture between her and Michael. They began developing a peer support model specifically designed for military medical personnel, combining Sarah's academic training with Michael's practical experience. In veteran services, their first pilot program launched 6 months later with a small group of Navy medics and Army medics who had recently returned from deployment. The program combined group therapy sessions led by Sarah, with peer mentorship provided by Michael and other veterans who had successfully navigated their own healing journeys. The results exceeded their expectations. Participants showed significant improvements in symptoms of PTSD, depression, and moral injury within just 3 months. More importantly, they reported feeling less isolated and more hopeful about their ability to continue their military careers or transition successfully to civilian healthcare roles. Dr. Reeves, who had agreed to serve as a consultant on the program, was impressed by the outcomes. "You've created something unique here," she told them during a program evaluation meeting. "The combination of clinical treatment and peer support, specifically tailored to the experiences of military medical personnel, is filling a real gap in available services." Word of their program began to spread within military medical communities. Sarah received invitations to present their model at conferences, and Michael was asked to consult with other veteran service organizations interested in replicating their approach. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came when they received a letter from one of their program participants, a Navy medic named Lisa, who had served in Afghanistan around the same time as Sarah. Before joining your program, I thought I was the only one who struggled with the choices I made as a medic in combat, Lisa wrote. Learning that others had faced similar dilemmas and found ways to heal gave me hope for my own recovery. More than that, it helped me see that my experiences, painful as they were, had value in helping others. Reading Lisa's letter, Sarah felt the deep satisfaction of purpose fulfilled. The trauma that had once threatened to define her as a failure had been transformed into a source of strength and service to others. Her choice that day in Afghanistan, which had seemed like such a devastating mistake, had ultimately led her to a career path where she could help other military medical personnel navigate their own complex moral landscape. Michael felt equally fulfilled in his role. His own journey from injured veteran to mentor and advocate had shown him that healing was not just about personal recovery, but about using that recovery to serve others facing similar challenges. As they looked toward the future, both Sarah and Michael could see how their shared trauma had become the foundation for meaningful work that extended far beyond their own healing. They had not only found their way back from the darkness of that day in Afghanistan, but had used their experience to light the way for others making the same difficult journey. 2 years after that first unexpected encounter in the hospital ward, Sarah stood at a podium addressing an audience of military medical personnel, mental health professionals, and military leadership at the annual Military Medicine Conference. Her presentation, titled "From Moral Injury to Meaningful Service: Peer Support Models for Combat Medical Personnel," represented the culmination of her graduate studies and the success of the program she and Michael had developed. In the audience, Michael sat in the front row, along with Dr. Reeves and several participants from their pilot program. Sarah could see familiar faces scattered throughout the auditorium, colleagues from her hospital, professors from her graduate program, and military personnel who had heard about their work through word of mouth. 2.5 years ago, I was a Navy SEAL medic struggling with what I believed was a catastrophic failure of duty, Sarah began, her voice clear and confident. I had made a choice in combat that saved 23 civilian lives but compromised a military objective. The shame and isolation I felt nearly ended my career and my ability to serve others. She paused, making eye contact with Michael, who gave her an encouraging nod. What I learned through my own healing process is that the moral injuries we sustain in combat are not signs of weakness or failure, but evidence of our humanity and our commitment to our core values as medical professionals. The challenge is not to eliminate these difficult moments from military service, but to create systems that help us process and integrate them in ways that strengthen rather than diminish our capacity to serve. Sarah went on to describe the program she and Michael had developed, sharing statistical outcomes and participant testimonials that demonstrated its effectiveness. She spoke about the importance of peer support, the unique challenges faced by military medical personnel, and the need for specialized approaches to treating moral injury in healthcare providers. The response was overwhelmingly positive. During the question and answer period, several audience members shared their own experiences with moral injury and expressed interest in implementing similar programs in their own commands. After the presentation, Sarah was approached by a Navy captain who introduced herself as the Director of Mental Health Services for Naval Special Warfare Command. Petty Officer Martinez, the captain said, "I've been following your work with great interest. We'd like to discuss the possibility of implementing your program throughout our medical personnel training pipeline." This conversation led to Sarah's next major opportunity. 6 months later, she found herself back on active duty but in a completely different role. She had been selected for a special assignment, developing and implementing trauma-informed care protocols for all Navy medical personnel serving in combat zones. Her new position allowed her to work directly with military leadership to address systemic issues that contributed to moral injury among medical personnel. She helped develop new training protocols that better prepared medics for the ethical dilemmas they might face in combat. And she created support systems that would be available immediately upon their return from deployment. Michael's career had also evolved significantly. His success in veteran services had led to an offer to head up a new Department of Veterans Affairs initiative focused on peer support programs. His role involved training other veterans to become peer counselors and developing programs that could be implemented at VA facilities across the country. The program he now directed served hundreds of veterans annually, and its success had attracted national attention. Michael found himself testifying before Congress about the importance of peer support in veteran mental health care and advocating for increased funding for programs that connected veterans with others who shared similar experiences. Despite their demanding careers, Sarah and Michael maintained their close friendship. They still met regularly, though now their conversations often focused on professional collaboration rather than personal healing. They co-authored research papers, presented together at conferences, and consulted on each other's projects. Their monthly check-ins with Dr. Reeves had evolved into professional consultations where they discussed challenging cases and sought guidance on program development. Dr. Reeves often remarked that watching their transformation from patients to colleagues had been one of the most rewarding experiences of her career. "You've become living proof that trauma can be transformed into purpose," she told them during one of their meetings. "Your willingness to share your story and use your experience to help others has created ripple effects that extend far beyond what you probably realize." Indeed, the impact of their work was becoming clear in ways they hadn't anticipated. Lisa, the Navy medic who had participated in their first pilot program, had gone on to become a peer counselor herself and was now implementing similar programs with Marine medical personnel. David, Michael's former client who had initially resisted all forms of therapy, had completed his own healing journey and was training to become a peer support specialist. The program had also caught the attention of international military organizations. Sarah had been invited to present their model to NATO allies, and Michael had consulted with Canadian and Australian veteran services organizations interested in adapting their approach. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came in an unexpected form. Sarah received a letter forwarded through military channels from the family of one of the civilians she had saved in Afghanistan. The letter, written in broken English but filled with heartfelt gratitude, described how the life Sarah had saved that day, a young girl named Fatima, had grown up to become a nurse herself, inspired by the American medic who had risked everything to help her. Fatima speaks often of the brave woman who chose to help innocent people, even when it meant great personal cost, the letter read. She says she became a nurse because she wants to honor that choice by dedicating her own life to healing others. Reading this letter, Sarah felt a profound sense of completion. The choice that had haunted her for so long had not only saved lives in that moment, but had inspired a lifetime of service in someone else. The ripple effects of that single decision in a chaotic moment in Afghanistan continued to spread, creating healing and hope in ways she could never have imagined. That evening, Sarah called Michael to share the letter. As she read it aloud, both of them were moved to tears, not the tears of grief and trauma they had shed together during their healing process, but tears of joy and fulfillment. "Do you remember that day in Dr. Reeves' office when she asked us to identify ways our trauma had made us stronger?" Michael asked after Sarah finished reading. "I remember," Sarah said. "I don't think either of us could have imagined this, not just our own healing, but how many other people would benefit from what we went through." Sarah agreed. Looking back over the past 3 years, she could trace a clear line from that terrible day in Afghanistan through her darkest moments of despair, to her unexpected reunion with Michael, through their healing process together, and finally to the meaningful work they were both doing now. The room that had fallen still when she first encountered Michael in the hospital ward had been the beginning of a journey neither of them could have anticipated. That moment of recognition, painful as it had been, had set in motion a process of healing that had transformed not only their own lives, but the lives of countless others. As she hung up the phone with Michael, Sarah looked out her window at the lights of the city below. Somewhere out there were veterans struggling with their own moral injuries, military medical personnel carrying burdens they felt they couldn't share, and families trying to support loved ones whose experiences seemed impossible to understand. Tomorrow, she would continue the work of reaching those people, of creating systems and programs that ensured no one had to heal in isolation the way she once had. The silence she had maintained for so long about her experiences had been broken, transformed into a voice that could offer hope and healing to others walking the same difficult path. Sarah Martinez, the wounded SEAL medic who had once believed her service had ended in failure, had discovered that sometimes the most profound success comes not from never falling, but from learning to transform your wounds into wisdom that can heal others.